My day, like many days this week, was a veritable shit show because, of course, we've been trying to sell the house, and that means that I have to allow people that I have never met in my life and have absolutely no idea what type of people they are come traipsing through the house. What's the word I'm looking for? Um, Without me being in the area to see like what all the hell they're getting into. Like I just get to see the aftermath of like coming home and like doors are open all over the place. Hell, one when I got back from and I'm not trying to bitch, but I do need to vent a little bit to get it out. Um, when I got home to make lunch after the appointments this morning, the front door was unlocked. I was like, wow, that's super professional. Um, so yeah, it's been a very oh shit, you're gone. All right, let me see. Let's go. Recording.
It does that. It will
Mhm.
do that. But it will only do that once. So
Oh, okay.
I think
As
we're
long as
good.
you know what the boundaries are.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know how much of my rant you actually got to hear.
You
But
have
the good,
strangers in your house, and
yes,
that's fun.
strangers traipsing all through my house and getting into shit. And well, like I said, when I got back for lunch this afternoon, the front door was unlocked. I was like, oh, that's super cool. Might as well have just left it open while you were at it. And then when I got back this evening and was going through and turning off lights and closing closet doors and shit, I was like, somebody made my bed. And I was just like, what? Who does this shit? Like, what? Why? Why? How does a made bed help sell a house? Like, I don't get that, but whatever.
Psychology.
Okay.
Well, you don't like people touching your sheets?
I don't like people that I don't know being in my house and messing with my stuff. No, like that
Yeah.
really bothers me
Yeah.
because I don't have like a lot of stuff and definitely not like super expensive stuff, but it's just like I don't know. It kind of feels like being violated in a way.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
definitely.
know.
I think it is. I think that's definitely what it is.
Yeah. So yeah, that's been my week. So if I'm a little bit more animated than usual this evening, that's probably why. I have a lot of this annoyance that has been building up over the course of the last week, and hopefully I will be done with it by this time tomorrow.
Good. All right. No worries. I'm down for it. I'm a little that's how I usually am. So I'm down for agitation.
Okay, cool. As
We
long as we're
can
on the same
spar.
page.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Awesome. Well, did you learn anything that you didn't know this week?
Um, hmm. That's a good question. Let me refer to my notes. Because I actually found the chapters this week personally to be kind of boring.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
and it's just from the standpoint of like military technology is not necessarily something that really interests me to begin with.
Hmm.
So I found my attention drifting a lot as I was
Okay.
trying to get through, like I guess it was the back half of the 70s and the 80s, as far
Hmm.
as the work that they were being commissioned to perform. Um, I don't know. I don't think I really learned well. Actually, no, I take that back. I did learn one thing new that kind of surprised me. And it was kind of towards actually, well, that That's chapter 16. So I might actually have to save it for next week.
Yeah, you read ahead.
I did
You
read
did,
a little
but
bit
you
ahead
did
this
extra
morning.
credit.
Yeah. So no, I don't guess I really learned a whole lot that was new this week. It did kind of flesh out some things in terms of like the various figures throughout that time period, like those 15 years of
Mhm.
the back half of the 70s and the 80s. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that the U.S. set off a nuclear explosion in a salt mine in Mississippi.
Hmm.
I had no idea. They talk about, so just the way that people talk about nuclear energy nowadays, it's so dangerous and it's not something to be even experimented with. Yet we're setting off tons of nukes underground for a long time. That was a normal thing. So it was kind of unexpected in my reading. I didn't know that nuclear tests were so kind of mundane in that way.
Well, I think kind of by the time they had gotten around to that, they kind of were. I mean, they were even with the nuclear test ban treaty that was signed between the United States and the Soviet Union. Each side was still like figuring out how they could actually get around that treaty to continue testing these new weapon systems that they wanted to develop without alerting the other side to the fact that they were trying to skirt around the treaty to develop these new weapon systems.
Whoa, wait, what? That sounds familiar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm also familiar with the stories of like the U.S. Army doing atmospheric tests over like large metropolitan areas like San Francisco, back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s with chemical agents, completely like not alerting the population to the fact that these tests were being conducted at the time and only releasing the documents, several decades later. But yeah, our government, our military has been doing these sorts of things for, the better part of 100 years, if not longer than that. And, there's some evidence to suggest that, yeah, it has been going on longer than that. It's just, they don't tell us about it until well after the fact. So I guess, I don't know, maybe it should be surprising, but I don't know. I'm kind of to the point where I'm starting to get a little bit jaded to all of this information, where, finding out something like that, you know, because I think that was the one where they didn't they evacuate the entire, like there was a little town within, I don't know, 15, 20 miles of this salt mine, and they ended up evacuating the entire thing because they weren't exactly sure like what effect it was going to have on the population. But they didn't evacuate them beforehand. They only did it after the nuclear warhead had been detonated underground, and they were like, oh, there's people nearby. Maybe we should, just in case, maybe we should get them out of the way. Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't surprise me anymore, which I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that, but it's kind of true.
Yeah. Well, they also did kind of mess up their houses too. And I don't know what, I could look into it further, but she didn't say anything about kind of fixing that problem that they made for them. Do you know if that is something that they did for those people?
Oh, probably
Because
not.
that's a lot of houses that they would need to rebuild. With a $5 million budget. I'm not sure if that's something that they could have done.
I don't think it's anything that they would have even looked at doing, even at the time. Just because, again, why go to that trouble when you can just feed the people, some story about what it was that happened and make it seem like it was some sort of natural event that had, destroyed the structural integrity of their homes. Oh, well, it's an act of God. So, I mean, but what do you really want us to do about it?
Hope you had insurance.
Yeah, here's a couple grand to make repairs. Hope, stretch it out.
Yeah. Yep. And I remember a few of these little experiments that they were doing where they were giving interesting cover stories. Do you remember that? I can't remember exactly where I read that, but there were a few cover stories that they gave when they were working on. Oh, one of them was the microwave thing at the embassy.
Oh yeah.
In Lebanon, I think.
Was it the embassy in Lebanon or the embassy in Moscow?
Was it Moscow? Because I just know that they thought that the Russians were trying to control their minds, or the Soviets, I guess, with these microwaves, and they were telling them that they were looking for a virus when they were collecting their blood. And they did not disclose the microwaves until about a year later. And then they got sued because they were like, well, if we were being exposed to even just like small amounts of radiation, why wouldn't you tell us?
Well, yeah. So and of course the official story was they didn't want to divulge that information up front because they were afraid that it was going to tip off the Russians. And then that would cause them to cease whatever devious plan it was that they were using the microwaves for in the first place. And
but that was what they should have wanted, was for them to stop that. What they actually wanted was to study it.
Right. And figure out what they were doing so that they could use it to develop their own technology to do the same thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, those evil Soviets using mind control. We don't want them to stop. We just want to do it better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice. Like in all the way back in chapter 11, when they talk about the establishment of the Advanced Sensors Office, one of the things that Weinberger points out is that this, while they did it to develop, new types of technology, they had specifically done it so that they could market this technology to the CIA and to other agencies within the intelligence community. So it's not that they're looking to try and do good in the world, which is how the government always wants to present itself to everybody. They're looking for ways that they can get a leg up on everybody else and then use that to make a profit.
Right. I mean, they are an organization that has interests, and one of those interests is to continue existing. So that makes sense. It's just silly to pretend that isn't the case. It's I don't know. It's annoying to have that be excluded from the narrative. Well, they didn't want their organization to end, so they looked for something to do. What they decided to do was sell technology to the intelligence community. That is a fine and rational explanation, but that's never how the story is told.
Well, no, and I think as we read further into the book and we start to get closer to events that took place in both in your lifetime as well as mine, you're going to start noticing the places where she chooses deliberately, in my opinion, to leave out aspects of events that we know to be fact. Again, it's from me reading ahead into chapter 16 this morning. But as we make the turn from the 20th into the 21st century, she starts citing various events and how DARPA was, if not directly, at least tangentially involved in some of the things that came out of those events. And she's very rigid with the narrative that rigid and brief with the narrative that she provides around those events as to, why they took place and all of that good sort of stuff. But the other thing too is getting back to the salt mine, because I did make another note here from chapter 11. Apparently this really stood out to me, and I think it bears getting on the record. In the course of talking about, I think it was the Advanced Sensors Office again, because she refers to its first program being this thing called Project Pandora, which was a top secret program doing research into mind control. And specifically, it used people from the military as the test subjects. And she makes a very interesting admission in this part of the book where she says, the conscripts assigned to Fort Detrick, which is right up the road from me, have been a continuous source of human subjects for Defense Department research for decades, not for weeks, months, or years, but for decades. Subjects there have been exposed to everything from yellow fever to hallucinogenic drugs. Now, if they're willing to do that to their enlisted people in the military, the ones that we're supposed to believe are on the front lines of protecting this country, doesn't it make sense that they would be willing to do similar things to just your rank and file citizens?
Yeah, that are not very useful for anything to them. Yes. Yeah, again, I think it's that they have no issue with getting what they feel like needs to be done. And I don't think that they care about the consequences. Like she says in this same chapter, potentially, or maybe the next chapter. Yeah, it's the next one. They spent $20 billion trying to build a technology that could detect IEDs, only to find out that the best way to do it was with a dog.
Yep.
$20 billion.
Yeah, and that was in the late 60s, early 70s, something like that.
Yeah, that was the 60s. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
because I
that
think
report was issued in 71.
Yeah, because it was they were using data collected from, if I remember correctly, it was being collected from Vietnam and Iran and the various hotspots in the world at that time, and was filed in the National Archives. And then she goes on to point out later that when the Pentagon commissioned a new study in the early 2000s to try and figure out the exact same thing, this report from 1971 was apparently just conveniently ignored because it was easier to allocate and spend the money than it was to try and find out what the prior research had shown.
Right. Reinventing the wheel every single time is probably not the best way to go about inventing a wheel or building a wheel. So
unless you're trying I don't think to steal and launder a lot of money.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, she doesn't seem to describe every one of the individuals involved in these little projects as the best kind of people. I mean, one of them we already know has gone to prison for laundering, embezzling money. So I think it's fair to assume that other incidences of the same kind of activity are happening, but she seems to regard these people, at least everyone besides Cesaro, as like a very noble sort of, just a guy. At one point she goes on to describe, I forget who it is, but she describes somebody as just like a straight guy who's just doing what he can for everybody and just a patriot, right?
Right. Right.
Like nobody has any other sort of interests.
Right. Right. And I mean, when you think about it, that's also the view that we're told we're supposed to have of like our politicians and of the people who rise up the ranks in the military. Oh, these are just good people trying to serve their country. They're just trying to do the best for everybody. But yet we're shown time and time again that that's not actually what the reality of the situation is. These people are actually there to serve their own interests first. And if it just so happens that everybody else benefits from whatever it is that they're involved in, that just kind of ends up being, happenstance. So, I mean, I don't know, the deeper I get into this book and the more like I come across passages where she starts to talk about something that I have a fair amount of knowledge on, and literally just gives it like a paragraph or a half a paragraph and then moves on to something else. I'm like, whoa, this is it. To me, it couldn't be more blatant, that she's literally just trying to say, okay, well, there was, what's the term? I mean, to me, it's like she's trying to whitewash things.
Yeah, she's getting plenty of red herrings. She's admitting to the things that she would like you to focus on so that you don't look into anything else.
Right.
And I can feel that without having knowledge of much of the other things, like like the $20 billion to find out that the dogs are the best bomb detectors. Like, okay, that's a lot of money spent, but I'm sure that's not the worst thing that has happened.
No, just wait.
Okay.
Just wait. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you're not familiar with what DARPA was up to in the early aughts, it's coming. That was one of the things that I saw from doing my extracurricular work this morning. She brought up a program that was begun 2000, 2001, something like that, that is very notorious. It's one of those things that when you start talking about it, people who have any knowledge of the subject whatsoever are like, oh, okay. Yeah. So there's stuff coming. It's gnarly.
Oh, great. Just love having
she'll probably whitewash it all, so don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I do sit here with my computer open while I'm reading so that I can look everything up, because obviously she just kind of like walked by the My Lai massacre. And I was like, My Lai, okay, let me just look this up. And I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Almost, I mean, that is a real mass killing. That.
Yeah. And it was ordered.
About?
Yeah. It was ordered from the highest levels of the military as well.
Like shooting babies. That is what we sunk to then. Wow.
Yeah. And to me, because again, I've known about My Lai for, I don't even know how many decades at this point. Because again, I grew up with people who were Vietnam vets, right?
Okay.
So they lived through this stuff themselves, and came home to tell their own stories. My Lai is one of the things that is always considered to be a turning point as far as the sentiment of the American people towards the war is considered. Because again, it was very highly publicized by the American media, not necessarily because they were, doing the kind of the altruistic thing of, covering the news and delivering all the hard hitting facts so that people could be informed, yada, yada, yada. American news media has always been a captured institution, as far as I can tell. So if they were putting stories about this particular event on the 6 o'clock news, and Walter Cronkite was telling people about it on CBS, there was a reason for it. And the more that I turn this one over in my head, the more I start to convince myself that it was most likely deliberate, and it was done in order to turn the American public's stomach and get them against the war. Because again, you had all these different psychological operations going on in the back half of the 60s, with like the whole thing with the hippie movement and the Laurel Canyon scene and all of that, as well as what was going on in Vietnam. The whole equal rights thing, Roe versus Wade, like all of these things were happening all at the same time, not all together different from kind of what we've been living through for the last 5 to 7 years or so.
Shock
right. There's yeah. So I don't know. It kind of seems, because it's not uncommon for the American military to order these types of raids to take place in wartime, right? We saw it in Vietnam. We saw it in Iraq. We saw it in Afghanistan. We even, you can find stories of it from World War I and World War II. These are not uncommon things in terms of what you see in a wartime scenario. But the fact that it was as highly publicized as it was at the time, the fact that it was allowed to get out to the American public, that's the thing that stands out to me more so than anything else. And that's kind of why I think it was done deliberately. But that's just kind of my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I think she gives it, is that even in chapter 10? I think so. I think she gives it, no. I think she gives it about 2 sentences without much going on into it. Yeah, I mean, what I looked into was what happened. It would be interesting to watch the actual coverage from that time.
What's still out there?
I don't know if
I'm sure you can find it on like YouTube or anything, but
probably.
I know it's out there. There's definitely got to be some copies of the news reports in like the National Archives. But then, of course, you'd have to travel all the way to the District of Criminals and actually jump through all their hoops to get in and look at stuff.
No thanks. Sounds like a trap.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're a journalist, it's not that hard. If you have press credentials and you're like, oh, I'm here doing research for a story, most of the time they don't look at you twice. But if you're just an interested citizen, they typically want to know, what it is you're up to.
All right, let's see here. Oh, and it was chapter 12 about my life. Let's see. So I didn't know who Daniel Ellsberg was before reading this.
Oh, really?
No, I had no idea. I didn't
Interesting.
know what the Pentagon Papers referred to. And that's just being me being honest in my ignorance so
Mhm.
that I can learn better. So I would like to kind of read through that, but I just imagine it's a boring sort of muck filled, jargon filled piece of paper. So have you read it?
I haven't read through the actual Pentagon Papers myself. I know the story. I know obviously who Daniel Ellsberg is. He's kind of the prototypical truther whistleblower. Um, so I don't know. It might be interesting because from what I understand, there's quite a few documents contained in the Pentagon Papers that were never supposed to be made public. But
Hmm.
because of the fact that he leaked them, they had to declassify these documents and make them available to the public because the public already had them. Um,
Okay. They
yeah,
were like, yeah, those are going to be public anyway.
yeah,
Nothing to see there.
yeah. But I think that was also about the same time because was that in chapter 13 where she was talking about Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers?
12. It's on page 203.
Okay. All right. Because it was also in the next chapter, chapter 13. I forget
Oh,
exactly what the reason for her making this reference was, but she was discussing Dr. Sidney Gottlieb as a CIA asset and referencing his connection to quote one of the agency's most notorious projects, the use of LSD as a mind control drug. But she never actually says what the name of that project was, even though everybody knows what the name of that project is.
she
So,
did. She did write MK Ultra in here somewhere.
right, but not in connection with Dr. Gottlieb. That's the
Hmm.
point that I'm making.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you don't already know that was, and the other thing too is that particular passage that she has in the book is again the official narrative for MK
Hmm.
Ultra. It
Okay.
is that this project was seeking, over the course of more than 2 decades. All right, because it's actually in like the congressional record. We can show it going all the way back to like 1950 before we ever even get to the Church Committee in 1975. Um, that was the sole aim of MK Ultra was the use of LSD to produce mind controlled slaves, right? Like they poured billions and billions and billions of dollars
Hmm.
supposedly into this program over the course of 2.5 decades to use LSD to mind control people. That's the official
Not to
narrative.
not you, as we're gonna control the Soviets. Okay, you can trust us.
Right. Or we want to use it so that we can develop assets in other countries so that if it becomes necessary to assassinate despots, um, we can activate these people as needed.
Oh, like sleeper agents or something like that.
Correct. But again, that story of MK Ultra is again what the government wants people to believe. They don't want people knowing that MK Ultra was actually an umbrella program. In other words, there were something like 150 different sub projects that all went under the MK Ultra umbrella. And
Okay.
it wasn't just experiments that were carried out here in the United States. It was going on in Canada. It was going on in Southeast Asia. It was going on in Europe. It was going on in South America. It was going on all over the freaking place. And each
Mhm.
different sub project was to try and create a different benefit from
Okay.
mind control. So, like the scenario that I just posed, having somebody that you could literally remotely activate to become an assassin, on the other side of the world, simply by like picking up the telephone and speaking, 3 words into the telephone, and all of a sudden, they become a ready-made assassin. Like, that was an actual sub-project in MK Ultra. It's just they weren't necessarily using LSD to try and accomplish that effect. But again, that's what they want people to believe. Oh, the CIA was experimenting with psychoactive drugs on people to try and mind control them. Because that's again the I forget which fallacy it is, but it's presenting a very simplistic view of something in order to be able to dismiss it and direct attention away from it.
Straw man.
Correct. Yeah.
That's, I mean, and that says nothing of, I don't know, consent or like bodily autonomy, just not even in the discussion.
No. Well, these were, again, it all goes back to Operation Paperclip, right? The people that were tasked with conducting these sub projects were all people who were brought over through Operation Paperclip, right? And a lot of the techniques that were being developed were stuff that they were working on in Germany in the 1920s and the 1930s. It's just their work got interrupted once World War II happened. And then once they were brought over here and we set up the framework of the CIA and all of that nonsense, then they were finally able to start continuing with their work. It's like,
Nazis got us to the moon.
Allegedly. Yes.
If anybody did, though, it was the Nazis.
Maybe. But yeah, I just, again, this was another one of those instances where I'm sitting there reading this book and she, makes this reference to somebody whose history I understand probably way better than the average American does. Of course, that being Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, and understanding exactly who he was and what type of work that he did. And she literally just glosses right over it, keeps right on going to the next thing. And I'm like, wow.
He was an unwavering patriot.
You can
That's all you need to know.
You could write hundreds of pages on Dr. Sidney Gottlieb alone. Like, there's no need to spend half a paragraph on this man and, not even name the project that you're associating him with. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's this is where I start getting a little bit, incredulous as far as these types of books are concerned. Because it just seems like the deeper I get into it, the more it's just revisionist history. This is what we want you to know. This is what we don't want you to know. Well, I mean, obviously they're not telling us what they don't want us to know. But yeah, it's, I don't know. Usually those are the points where my attention starts drifting, because I'm just like, why should I listen to anything this person is saying now? Because they're not demonstrating to me that they actually know anything of what they're talking about.
Well, so is MK Ultra a CIA project, or not an ARPA project?
No, it was not an ARPA project, although I do know that there were, well, let me see. Well, yeah, Project Pandora back in 1965 was ostensibly doing research into mind control. To the best of my knowledge, ARPA is not, or was not, directly involved with any of the sub projects for MK Ultra. But again, that could just be a case of where the dots haven't been connected yet. It could very well be that DARPA provided something to one or more of these sub projects, be it technology, be it oversight, whatever. And, we just don't know about it yet. So I would hesitate to say that they weren't involved, but at the time in history that it was taking place, it wasn't really in DARPA's wheelhouse. They were more concerned with, like data analytics and surveillance and all of those sorts of things.
Counterinsurgency.
Yeah.
Anti-rebellion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you, I mean, obviously you do, but I just thought that the similarity between the Project Pandora objective was very striking between Neuralink, right? We've seen, I've read about monkeys playing video games. I've heard people talking about it with just their brain, right? So I just wonder if that's something. I mean, my suspicion is that Musk, in his pursuits of a brain chip, he's being heavily financed by people, organizations like DARPA, the Defense Department, etc. But just reading that cemented that even further. It's like, well, that's clearly what they're looking for. They allowed this person to kind of go for it, and they were like, sure, yeah, that's something that we'd like to see, so go for it.
Yeah. Well, and I think Jason Burmis would agree very strongly with you on that, based on what I've heard him say in regards to Elon Musk over the past couple of weeks and months. But that's also been kind of how DARPA does it too. They don't necessarily develop the technology in-house themselves. They subcontract it out to corporations, to scientists, to universities. They provide the funding, they provide the oversight, but they allow the private sector to actually do like the real nuts and bolts work. So yeah, well, because in chapter 13, all the way back as far as 1973, the author talks about this guy Jacques Vidal, and research that he was doing at UCLA on quote unquote brain computer interfaces. Well, that sounds exactly like Neuralink, because what you were talking about, like with the monkeys playing video games with their mind. Apparently this guy Vidal was doing that at UCLA all the way back in 1973, before we even really had video games.
Musk is taking the original concept and he's not starting from scratch. That's definitely the case, because the experiments are the exact same. Like even down to the banana mush that they're getting rewarded with.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I thought this was a new thing, but it's really not. I mean, maybe the technology is a bit different, but
it's not even a new thing for Elon Musk, because that also sounds like exactly what he did with Tesla.
Oh, he stole an idea there.
It wasn't that he stole the idea, but he took it over. In other words, Tesla was already an existing company, right? They already had a product that they were manufacturing. Elon Musk just came in and literally bought the company and took it over.
What a genius.
Right.
He's a very stable genius. All this. Oh man, I was going to say something else. Forgot. I'll think of it later. But
yeah, it'll either come back or it won't. But I don't know. Like I say, I don't have a whole lot of notes as far as like things that stood out to me beyond chapter 13 until we get to chapter 16. But we'll cover that next week. But that's again because so like I lived through the 1980s, which is pretty much what chapter 14 and 15 are about. And even into the, I think it gets into the 90s a little bit, as far as like the first Gulf conflict in uh, uh, like Bosnia and all of that stuff. Because during that time, DARPA was primarily concerned with developing stealth technology,
Mm.
which was a big thing in the 80s. I remember that. Like I remember seeing news reports about the military developing stealth technology and
Mm.
like asking my dad, well, what is that? So I was actually interested in that stuff at the time that it was happening. Um, so again, like those didn't present me with a whole lot of, I guess, new information. It was more just kind of going over and reinforcing some things that I already knew. But
I have a couple of things that stood out. Not much. I mean, again, like you said, it's a lot of this just seems to be kind of like a timeline. Not too much interesting, but I thought that it was illuminating that she was talking about how, well, I'll just read the quote. In Washington, the key to killing something controversial is never to admit you actually killed it. To do that, you first change the name. Perhaps a year later, you change the name again to confuse those who might be tracking it. Then you kill it. By that point, most people will have forgot about it.
That stood out to me too, by the way. I did actually write that down verbatim in my notes.
Yeah, well, they definitely understand the way the human mind works, and those sort of well, I think the thing that they're improving now is trying to figure out how to get people to forget about it or confuse people faster. So just the pace is increasing. But another thing that was interesting to me was when on the next page she was talking about how ARPA was no longer helping governments fight insurgency. It was bringing Western technocracy to their defense bureaucracies, teaching them how to buy weapons. So creating healthy markets.
Correct.
Right.
For American defense contractors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Much like what we see in other sorts of markets, right? Other sorts of markets, like biological weapons markets, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. Well, I was actually thinking about Ukraine as being like the most prominent example.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we're sending how many billions worth of dollars of armaments
like
to that
80
country?
billion at this point, right?
Yeah.
It just keeps going up.
Yeah.
Let's see. The Rand Corporation's name has come up a lot. Which I didn't find really surprising. But
I was actually just about to ask you that question.
Oh yeah, no.
Like I'm never surprised to see their name in conjunction with anything that has to do with the federal government or the military. It's like Rand. Oh, of course, yeah.
They are killing baby bunnies in science experiments. And seeing if the mother is distressed, right? That is the objective, is to distress a rabbit by killing its young. It's just like there are no ethics. Ethics don't exist here. No,
because again, at the end of the day, it's all about the results. It's all about the data. So how you get from point A, which is the beginning of your experiment, to point B, which is the conclusion and the collection of the data, is irrelevant. Morals are going to complicate things. Ethics are going to complicate things. You just want the raw data. Like that's pretty much how they have always conducted these types of operations. The outcome is more important than anything else, including human life.
Well, you can just have more humans.
Maybe.
Probably.
That's
Have you
that's
seen the birth rates?
well, that's what I'm saying. Is there are plenty of countries around the world where birth rate is now well below replacement. So I don't know. Maybe that's an argument for another time, but I think that's definitely a conversation that can be had.
Yeah. Well, I just remember thinking 5 years ago, like people like me who are, mid-20s were still not even close to considering having children.
Mm.
Whereas my mother's sort of, I don't know, I think it's I forget what they call them. It's not Gen X, it's the one before them.
Boomers.
No, it's between the boomers and the Gen Xers. There was like this weird, like latchkey kids sort of weird generation. But anyway, they were having kids in like their mid-20s. And then the generation prior to that was having kids in their early 20s. And I just see this like sort of trajectory where people are just going to they're just going to miss the window, right? Because there's only so much you can do biologically to lengthen the amount of time you have. Well,
true.
for women.
True. For women, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a completely different story with men. Men can have babies whenever they want. Well, for
right,
the most part.
Mm, that the real power of reproduction is sexual selection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Women have determined exactly every single person that exists on the planet till this point. They will continue to do so until an artificial womb has been devised. But until then, we still have a little bit of control over who exists. So, and that is very threatening to people like technocrats who would rather have that power than let us stupid people make bad decisions.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is making bad decisions. I think the other part of it is having that control of the gene pool, or what they consider to be the breeding stock of humanity. They, for whatever reason, they labor under the false pretense that if they can control the genetic makeup of the human species, they can craft a better human being, or at least better than what has been created heretofore. Which again, to me, is just a lot of run-of-the-mill human arrogance. It's a pattern that has repeated itself throughout our known history, and probably even most of what we don't know about. Is there always seems to be individuals or groups that come along that, for whatever reason, are convinced that they know better than everybody else, and they're the ones who should be doing the dictating to everybody else about how things should be. And the problem is that there comes a point where the people who are doing the dictating and the people who are being dictated to are no longer able to occupy common ground. Mm-hmm. And that's where we typically have like large bloody conflicts. Mm-hmm. And again, it's a pattern that you can see repeated over and over and over again throughout history, and yet it keeps happening. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure why.
Well, people will always want to export as much responsibility as they can safely. So if people call these people leaders, right? So if you can do the hard work of figuring out what the best choice is, and I can safely trust you to do that for me, I will continue to do so until it's very obvious that your choices are not in my best interest. But it has, because that is such a it's a good heuristic, because if I'm not doing the work of that, I can utilize my brain, time, labor on something else. It's difficult to get people to not to distrust the people that they do trust, because it's such a valuable resource. It's a valuable heuristic that saves me a lot of time, makes things easier. It avoids conflict, which most people don't like conflict. So I understand that. I understand why people would want to, sort of say, yeah, this guy, he's obviously smart. He's rich. He's got this, he did this company, he did this invention or whatever. And so he's obviously has some amount of right to have a bigger and better opinion than I do. But the problem with that is that it's very, and what will always be the problem with any sort of like pyramid of power is that it becomes less and less specific the more powerful that person becomes. So if you're a leader of 5 people, you can pretty easily accommodate everybody's preferences. When you're a leader of 500 people, it's a lot more difficult. You really can't. There's some study what people's social networks can only extend to, like, I don't know, 170 people. It's like the maximum amount of people that they can actually like pay attention to. So a 500 is definitely not doable. 5,000 is definitely not doable. 5 million is definitely not doable. And when you're talking about 5 billion, you're just not even in the realm of giving a shit about anybody's preferences if you want to get anything done.
I don't know. I go back and forth on that. I think there is a way that you can be a leader without necessarily telling people what they should be doing. And I could probably come up with a better way to phrase that, but that's kind of the essence of it. But of course, that would be the whole idea of leading by example, and being the change that you want to see in the world. If you see that something in the world is not right and needs to be changed, well, then the best place to start with making that change happen is in your own life, in your own mind, and the way that you conduct yourself with everybody else that you come into contact with. So I guess it kind of just comes down to how leadership is itself defined, and whether it is, somebody that we look to in order to answer questions and solve problems for us, or it is somebody that we look to in order to show us, what they've found as far as best practices are concerned.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't, there's always going to be contradictions with power, because you cannot give somebody power over you without giving somebody power over you. So while it does serve as a useful heuristic, the benefit is literally the cost. So sometimes it's good, sometimes it doesn't work out, but that's just, it seems how human societies tend to organize themselves, is with one person or a small group of people who make the decisions for everyone else, while everybody else goes about actually doing the things that make society possible, make the 5 or fewer decision makers capable of making those decisions, right? If those people aren't, let's just say the technocrats, they're certainly not raising all the money that enable our government to function, they contribute very little to our budget, right? All the other hundreds of millions of us do. They would not exist without us. Well, the bureaucrats, technocrats, all those people. So
Well,
it's
I
just
think
like in the military, you have to follow a certain chain of command. The chain of command ends at the president, right? So it doesn't matter what any of you think. If the president, or I suppose the Secretary of Defense is like a 5-star general, right?
well, actually, no. Secretary of Defense is usually and has traditionally been a civilian, not an actual military person.
Oh, okay. Well, that's probably good for civilian oversight. But
Well, I think it
anyway,
was.
you're
Go ahead.
oh, I think there are definite costs, but definite benefits. You can definitely more efficiently target resources into an objective if you have a totalitarian style government, right? But what the cost is that nobody gets anything else they want. So it really only works if you and everybody else you are governing want the same thing. That's when it's okay, right? But that's usually never the case. So it's usually never ideal.
Well, I'm still trying to answer the question of whether or not, because this is where I am on my particular journey. I've basically gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, no form of government is legitimate, or at least none that have ever existed on this planet have or could be determined to have been legitimate. Certainly not by the time that they ended. So then, like, the question that I run up against most often now is government even necessary? Like, I'm still grappling with the whole notion that we're supposed to believe that people are incapable of governing themselves, that if left to their own devices, the average man or woman is going to lie, rob, cheat, steal, murder, whatever they need to do in order to get the things that they need. When again, looking back through history, the vast majority of people who have not had government imposed upon them did not do these things. They figured out how to work with one another in order to provide for one another so that everybody got the things that they needed to thrive. And it seems more often than not that when government becomes a part of the equation and things like law are imposed upon groups of people, that's where we start seeing some of the more unseemly human characteristics start to rise to the surface. So I mean, that's just kind of where I am now. I'm like, is government even necessary? Like, is there a way for us to develop some sort of system that allows us to not have any sort of overarching body kind of dictating to the population how things should be or how they shouldn't be?
Well, I think I'm not sure. I think government is not necessary, but it is inevitable in most circumstances. Like you said, it begins like the natural origin of governance is one's governance over oneself, right, and one's body. And typically that is driven by self-interest. I think that you can very easily rely on individuals to do what's best for themselves. And except like insane people, right, who want to freeze to death or die of starvation or whatever. I don't think that or get murdered for like stealing from a bunch of people, because those kinds of things don't go unpunished, because those people who you're stealing from have their own self-interest. So what the problem is that we have a bunch of individuals, and then we have this thing called the group or society, right? That isn't actually a thing, a material thing, but it's sort of like an emergent feature of the world, right? Like we live in a society. Where is the society? It's nowhere, but it's all of us, right? So it's the problem is convincing you to sort of circumvent your own self-interest for the interest of the group or the society, right? So I give you $5. Now it's not really going to directly benefit me, but everybody's putting $5 into the pot so that we can build a bridge or something like that. I don't necessarily want the bridge, but a bridge would be okay with me. I know other people would benefit from it. And it's really not too big of a cost, $5, right? But still, it's a cost to me. So I have to be convinced to sacrifice that for the greater good, right? The problem is convincing people that there is such a thing. And I'm not really even sure what I think about that. I do know that there are people. And I think the reason why I think governments are inevitable is because there are conversations like that happen, and people do not yield their self-interest for that. And then they become accused of being lazy bystanders or mooches or parasites or whatever. And then you have a collective resistance to them that it's just a cause for conflict. So if you have a thing separate from the people to sort of mediate, draw the rules, and then say, listen, this applies to everyone, then the conflict is diminished. And the conflict doesn't become with one another, it becomes with the government, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's very, very well said. And I think that's a place that we are going to find ourselves as a society, as it were, more and more often in the coming future, because unfortunately, it seems that the trends of the world that we live in are directing us to a point where we are going to have to start making some very difficult decisions. And if we do not have people in positions of leadership that are capable of making the best decisions for everyone involved, then we are going to start seeing more and more conflict in order to resolve those questions. So yeah, I think these are very very powerful ideas that we really need to start grappling with, and the sooner the better. Because if we don't choose to take these difficult problems onto our shoulders ourselves, they are going to be forced upon our shoulders, and probably sooner than we think.
Well, again, the reason why the United States at least has this guise of local governments is because local governments more accurately represent you in the pyramid of power. So if you think about a one world government, it's not even going to approach representation. It does not give a shit what you think. It's not even attempting to represent you.
No, it might as well be a monarchy. Because it's essentially edicts, decrees, mandates, whatever you want to call them, coming from a central source.
When you have these institutions like a one world government, or even just the United States federal government, they become so detached from reality that they're literally just existing for their own existence. It doesn't matter that they've become something separate and apart from what they were designed to do. There is nothing that represents the original functioning or operation. So the only options with that are either to kill it, to circumvent it, or to reform it. And there, with something like a one world government, none of that's going to be possible. It will just be rained down on us from above.
Well, it depends on the enforcement arm more than anything else, because if you have a one world power structure that has no enforcement, then it doesn't matter what it decrees. If the people don't want to do it, they're not going to do it, and then the one world government is powerless to do anything about it. But if they are actually able to enforce their will upon the population, then it's a completely different situation. And I think that's probably more than anything else, that's the thing that people need to start having a realization of, is that if the enforcement is capable of happening, then that's when it becomes a very real and a very frightening possibility. But not until then. So I don't know. Again, we're at a very interesting inflection point in human history, where it seems like we're kind of teetering on that edge of falling into complete tyranny. And a lot of people, it seems like, have absolutely no recognition that is where we are. And I think that's probably the thing that troubles me the most is the fact that we're inching ever closer to that enforcement becoming a complete and total reality. And people are just, they're too busy paying attention to their Twitter feed to notice.
I feel like this is the culmination of many decades of effort. Because in this interim period, we've been kind of having, again, people don't have conversations about the concepts that would be required to say, oh, no, no, I don't think we want that. So I don't think we want to go along with that. But at this point, it's like the past, I mean, every time this has happened, every time there has been like a person or a group of people who have had the hubris to think that they really know better than everyone else, and that if they only had the reins, everything would be great, right? Every time that's happened, they've met a very brutal and deadly end. But it's like if you had, if you were trying to build a bomb and every time you did, it blew up in your face. But nobody knew about any of those experiments. Nobody knew about any of the times that it ended brutally with a bomb exploding in your face. And they're like, hey, come on, let's build this bomb. People are like, oh yeah, awesome. That's exactly what they want you to teeter over the edge and say, I don't see what's wrong with jumping off. Like I don't know what happens if you jump off, so I kind of curious. I want to try it out. Even though we have plenty of reasons. This has all been thought through. So we have this huge, like, critical mass of people who are just like, I don't know, I don't see what the problem is.
Well, I think what you're going to find is, as we get again deeper into the book, a lot of that planning that has taken place over the course of decades and in some cases centuries, DARPA actually had, in my estimation, and we'll see if what the author presents in the back half of the book actually bears this out. But DARPA actually had a very strategic hand in directing the the greater, at least American population to this point, especially over the course of the last 20 years or so. But again, that's what we're going to be getting into starting with chapter 16. So I'm actually excited to be able to dig into that a little bit further, because the internet is a huge component of what I see to be the control system that is going to be used as part of the enforcement arm for the one world governance structure. But we have steps, at least as far as this particular book is concerned, that we have to take before we get to that point. So my question for you as we wrap things up here is, how far do you want to try to get through for next week?
Well, you're already on chapter 16, so
I'm a couple pages in. I'm like, I don't
Okay.
think I'm even halfway into it. But she drops a bombshell within like the first couple of pages.
Oh, so you just couldn't stop. And hey, listen, for all the shit I give this book, it's not difficult to read, which I appreciate.
Mm-mm.
She's not a horrible writer. She's a pretty good writer. I think that she definitely knows what she's doing. So I do find myself like, all right, I'm gonna stop here for the night, and then I like read the next page and I'm like, I just want to keep reading. But so I'll give her that. But let's see.
Yeah, I'm not impugning her skill as a writer at all. I'm looking at it more from the standpoint of the narrative that she's presenting, because again, that's what I do.
Yeah. Should we? I mean, what the? It's just really Harry Potter references. I don't know. Do you want to just go through the epilogue, or do you want to stop at the epilogue? Because that'll probably be just a summation of what has been written. Seems like. Let's take a
I
peek.
don't know. How much do we have left? Because I thought we were. Let me see.
We have about 100 pages. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I'm already all the way through chapter 16, apparently. Interesting. All right. Let me see. Let's see if I can get all the way back. All right.
The epilogue is quite short.
I see that. Oh, okay. I see what's going on here now. All right. Acknowledgements, notes, sources, bibliography. That takes up quite a bit. Yeah, I don't see why we, well, 25 to 402. How about this? How about just get through as much as you can? Because let's see, starting with chapter 16 and going through the epilogue, you're looking at somewhere about 110, 115 pages, it looks like. Which again, depending on what life throws at you during the course of the week, that might be completely doable and it might not. But I mean, I've been trying to maintain about at least a half a chapter a day, which works out to roughly about 15 pages or so.
Yeah.
So I don't think it would be all that difficult.
No.
Of course, you know me, I'm going to keep reading regardless. So
yeah, obviously.
I just have to censor myself.
All right. Yeah, I'd say let's just go for it. See how far we get. I don't think that I'll have a problem finishing it, but we'll see.
All right.
Especially if you're telling me that the last few chapters are very interesting. Because
Well,
that's when I'm like,
they better be, because
taking the book to the bathroom and stuff.
Well, she piqued my interest.
Okay.
With chapter 16, which apparently I guess was the reason why I decided to get all the way through it this morning. I didn't even remember that I finished the entire chapter. Or maybe I actually started it yesterday morning and finished it this morning. I don't remember. but yeah, I'm interested to see where she goes, because 16 was interesting. It was, again, didn't necessarily present a lot of new information, but it kind of fleshed out some of the things that I already knew. So yeah, I'm really curious to see what she has in chapter 18, because there are some things that I know about, from previous research and from having people who worked in the military, and specifically in things like psychological operations and technology and all of those sorts of things. Like, they have fed me information over the years that not most of the general public is privy to. So I'm interested to see what she decides to share.
Dang it, I want inside sources. It's not fair.
You just have to run into them. Like, it's not like you can't go on Craigslist and be like, hey, I need somebody who works in the Defense Department as part of INSCOM, who can feed me a bunch of information even though you're not supposed to. Like, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I will definitely say that. But yeah, one of my good friends over the course of the last decade or so probably told me some stuff that I don't know, maybe he shouldn't have. But that's neither here nor there at this point.
Did or didn't happen. Who knows?
Yeah, you can't prove it.
Exactly. Not yet. Not until the brain chips have recorded every conversation we have.
Yeah, I'll be dead by the time that comes around. So, one way or another.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Sounds good.